The sky went quiet first. Then the screens woke. A cold voice filled every square of light. It said one line and no more. The words rolled across markets, across ships, across quiet rooms where people ate and worked and slept. Terra Disposable. People stopped what they were doing. The words did not sound like a crime or a joke. They sounded like a sentence. The message showed a small black seal. Under it came a paper invoice. The invoice had numbers and fees and a rule: pay or be removed. In the port city of New Harrow, Mira watched the screen at a repair stall. She was used to noise. The docks never slept. Her hands smelled of oil and metal. Her eyes were slow to move. But the word disposable burned through the room. A child nearby pointed and laughed at first. The laugh died when the child read the fine print. Mira worked on old engines. She fixed things others threw away. She had a small, stubborn pride. She read the invoice again. Her eyes caught a line no one else saw. It was a small code between taxes and fees. A set of coordinates. One sentence under them: balance due, 2 standard cycles. Mira frowned. The code looked like a mistake. It looked like a trap. She kept the paper. She did not tell anyone yet. Far above the planet, the council spoke as if it were weather. The broadcast came from the Consortium Council. Their halls floated in glass and chrome. 1,000 species watched their screens and smiled. For many, the ranking was a game. For some, it was a business. On Terra, the ranking felt like an insult. Leaders argued through the night. Markets crashed. Ships that had left for trade turned back. Soldiers stood in hush lines. People who had never looked up at the stars before waited to see what would fall. Jalen had always loved small rules. As a junior diplomat, he kept lists and forms and letters. He read the invoice on his desk like a wound. The council used the right words. It used legal tone. It used a number that made panic worse. Pay by the due date, or the removal would start. Jalen felt a strange calm. He saw the places where the council had left holes in its own law. He thought of old treaties and dusty memos. The invoice looked made to be obeyed. It also looked made to be argued with. Captain Rose stepped off his freighter with oil on his boots and a grin that had lost some teeth. His ship ran the old lanes. It carried food and parts and the small miracles that kept towns alive. When the broadcast came, Captain Rowe watched his crew go pale. He checked his log. His ship already had a council stamp. They did not trust him. They might take his freighter as payment. The city split. Some people wanted to burn the invoice. Some wanted to beg. Some wanted to run. The mood turned sharp. Jalen called a meeting. He opened a room and filled it with people who did not look like diplomats. Mechanics, a retired judge, traders, and Captain Rowe. Mira stood at the back with her paper. Jalen spoke soft. "We have 2 choices," he said. "We can pay and lose what we are, or we can fight and lose many more, or we can show them a new kind of answer." Mira slid the invoice across the table. She pointed at the code line. No one else had that line. The judge read it and tapped his fingers. Captain Rowe swore under his breath. The retired judge smiled in a small, surprised way. "Either this is a printing error," he said, "or someone left a key." They decided to find the lock. The first night, they followed the coordinates. They hacked an old scanner and used a map no one used anymore. The coordinates did not point to a city. They pointed to a small strip of space near an old trading way. An unused relay floated there like an old tooth. They found that the relay had a name carved in a language no one used now. The carving was old and small. It read, "For those who count a spare." Mira felt her stomach tighten. She thought of the child in the market. She thought of engines and songs and the long work of the people. The invoice was not only numbers. It was a hand that reached for memory. Back in the city, people made jokes. They burned effigies of the council in the square. The jokes were loud and brave, but the jokes were thin as paper in the dark. At the edge of the harbor, Captain Rowe loaded his freighter. He called it the Bramble. He loaded extra fuel, strange crates of old, rusty tools, and a sealed letter label for presentation. The crew laughed and boxed the nervy pride of a captain who had no stars left to fear. Night fell. A soft hum passed overhead. It was a sound that did not belong to the city. A black cruiser drifted above the port like a giant shadow. No lights, no call. It moved without the grace of a ship that wanted to show itself. It moved like something that wanted to hold its breath. On the Bramble, the crew watched the sky through the rigging. Captain Rowe stood very still. He thought of the invoice and the council seal. He thought of the code Mira had found. He thought of Jalen's quiet voice. A blinking light on the docking bay caught his eye. Then the Bramble was gone. No blast, no alarm, no wreckage. One moment the freighter was there under cranes, its paint flaking like old bark. The next moment the space where it sat was empty. The ropes hung loose. A gust of wind moved a single tarp. Men on the pier watched and touched their foreheads. The sky was calm. The cranes creaked. Someone screamed. The sound came from the dock like a bell. The black cruiser above the city turned a slow, almost thoughtful way, and a small paper invoice floated down to the water. It landed on a puddle and did not get wet. Mira held her paper in her hand. The coordinates on the invoice blurred like a laugh. Jalen looked at the sky and did not speak. Captain Rowe did not move. The city learned a new kind of fear. The council had sent not just a paper. They had sent an order that they could make real. And under Myra's thumb, the small code still glowed like a key that might open more than a door. The small printer in Myra's stall started like a heartbeat. It had no right to be loud in that quiet room. Paper fed in. The motor whined. On the page, 3 words appeared in dark, bold letters. Invoice, submitted, terms attached. Mira let the paper fall. She read the words again. Her hands shook a little. The paper smelled of old toner and salt air. She folded it and put it in her pocket. She knew what those words could mean. She also knew they could be a kind of answer no one expected. Jalen sat at his desk with a stack of forms. He wrote rules for a living. He had never thought he would write a weapon. He looked at the invoice Mira had printed. It used consortium language. The fonts, the seals, the clause numbers, all of it matched the council's own law books. Someone had learned to speak their tongue perfectly. They did not scream or march. They moved like a small, clever wave. Captain Rowe brought his crew together at dawn. The Bramble was in a dry dock for repairs. The ship's hull smelled of tar and old rain. He handed each man a folded paper. The papers were not orders. They were simple things: a name, a time, a seal. "This is not a fight yet," Captain Rowe said. "This is a visit. We go to the council, and we do what the paper asks." His voice was rough and tired. The crew saw the set of his jaw. They believed him. The human invoice traveled fast. Jalen and a small legal team filed it through consortium channels. It asked for what the council had never paid for. It used law against law. The invoice listed each act of contempt as a debt. For every colony ignored, every life dismissed as disposable, the paper put a number. For every stolen field and broken treaty, it named a price. It named people. It named dates. It named witnesses. The invoice had one odd clause. It read like a joke in a dry book. Clause 47B. 1 day's attendance at Terra for the council to witness the cost of their ranking. It asked that the council send representatives to Earth. It said they must come in person. It said they must see and listen. It said the visit would be scheduled and enforced. In the council halls, the invoice arrived in the same neat envelope the council used for gifts and fines. A young clerk opened it and smiled. The screen in the hall lit with a human seal. Diplomats sipped wine and laughed. "They send paper," one said. "They think they are clever." A group of young nobles cheered. The old diplomats pushed their plates aside and read. Then the laughter stopped. The invoice used binding language. It quoted old rules no one had read for many years. It cited financial laws that the council had helped write. It used the council's own ways to bind them. The document froze accounts. It put liens on properties. It named a legal process that could not be ignored without the council speaking aloud and signing a new paper. A small voice in the hall said, "If this is valid, we must answer." Some laughed. Some burned the paper in private. One delegate, Lisa, read the clause about attendance, and looked at the faces around her. Her eyes were tired in a sharp way. She had seen smaller worlds disappear under rules and paper. She remembered a field sold for ore and a village sold for a tax. Lisa stood and asked for a review. Outside, across 1,000 systems, the Invoice made small shocks. Markets paused. Ships that had planned to trade with Council worlds found their accounts frozen. A merchant on a minor station saw a transfer fail and swore. A banker on a capital world watched a ledger lock and frowned. Rumors spread. The Invoice cut at a chain no one had thought of. Jalen sent message to the councilmen and women who still cared about law. He asked for a hearing. He asked them to come to Terra and to make it public. He did not ask for war. He asked for a day. He wanted eyes on the ground. Some in the council called it bluff. Some called it a crime. A few called it a plea that had teeth. Captain Rowe moved the Bramble out at night. The crew dressed the ship with flags that meant nothing to nobles. They filled crates with old things, seeds, pictures, a thin book of songs. They packed a legal binder in a sealed chest. They called it the presentation. The Bramble carried a small team, people who could speak in public, and people who did not need much grace to tell truth. They did not go alone. Small freighters joined, old miners and traders who had lost ports to council rules. They called themselves a convoy, though it was a name more for pride than strength. They moved quiet routes. They used old jumps. They avoided patrols where they could. The council could have stopped them easily. A warning ship could have turned them back. But the Invoice had made more than a claim. It had made the law reach. The Bramble and its convoy carried documents that, if the council struck them, would trigger other rules. The human legal team had set fail-safes. If delegates were harmed, automatic claims would attach to council assets in dozens of allied systems. Banks would lock. Trade would jam. The humans tied the council's hands to its own ledgers. A young admiral in the council ordered a test. He sent a small scout to shadow the convoy. The scout blinked and returned with a message that made the old wine go warm. The Bramble had ports in its chest that held witnesses and proof. The scouts reported the presentation. They reported the faces of the people aboard. They reported a sealed letter with a heavy red stamp. In a quiet room in the council hall, a clerk opened the sealed letter and read in the light. His fingers went white. He called a messenger. He read aloud a short, terrible line he had found in the human invoice's fine print. It was a clause no one expected. Non-payment will trigger reclamation protocols. A hush fell in other halls. Screens lit with a thin line of text. A countdown unrolled across public displays. It did not roar. It did not scream. It ticked like a clock. The humans had put a number on the table. They had given the council time to choose. The countdown began and moved like a calm tide. Across the stars, systems watched. Men and women who had traded in paper, and law found their comfort slipping. They saw that the Invoice was not a joke, and not a threat in the crude way war is a threat. It was a formal thing. It used the rules everyone believed in. Jalen sat on a low step in his office and breathed. He had wanted a hearing. He had wanted the council to see. Now the council could not ignore the sound of a clock. Mira walked the docks at night and watched lights blink above the water. The Bramble took a slow path out of the harbor. The convoy rode the old lanes into darkness. In her hand, Mira held the printed page. The 3 words at the top seemed smaller now. The paper felt heavier. Somewhere in a far chamber, a council voice said, "We have 2 standard cycles." The word moved across networks and into living rooms and into banks. The time began to measure everything that could change. The human invoice read like a list of wrongs. Each line was a name. Each line was a date. Each line was a life. The paper moved in the air like a small storm. The sound of it was quiet, but the meaning was loud. On a ruined road outside a town called Gray Harbor, a child held up a picture of a lost farm. The picture was old. The child did not speak. The image was enough. When the council's delegates saw the photo in a public hearing, the room went very still. The child sat on a chair too big for them and watched faces that had once signed away fields and homes. The convoy carrying the human envoy did not travel like a fleet. It moved like people with a purpose. Captain Rose Bramble led. Behind it rode a patched miner, a trader's lighter, and a salvage liner full of witnesses. The ships were not powerful. They had heart. The council plane watched from above. It listened. It sent patrols that tried to scare the convoy. The patrols fired a warning flare. The humans waved back. They unfurled banners and leaned out of airlocks to shout the names the invoice listed. Jalen stood at the head of the presentation. He read lines slowly. Each name was a drum. He did not shout. He did not plead. He read facts. Colony Hesh. Sold to mining. Date, Cycle 1123. Witness, Miracle. The room listened. Some delegates shifted. Some did not move. The old laws had been full of small words that had large losses. The human invoice showed them plainly. Admiral Heck had watched the convoy on his screens. He was a man who loved order. He liked maps that were neat. He hated surprises. The invoice was a surprise made of paper. He sent a strike group to block the convoy's path. He meant to frighten them back to Earth. The strike came at dawn. Metal arced in the sky. Light split the dark. The convoy braced. The miner ship took one hit and smoked. Men ran and pulled hoses. The Bramble took an aim and shuddered. The sound of engines filled ears. Captain Rose smiled in a small way. He had an old trick. The Bramble's engine was not fast. It was clever. The crew opened a hatch and pushed out a thing that looked like scrap. It bloomed in space like a net. The net was not for fish. It was a decoy engine. The council missiles hunted the loud heat. They found the decoy and followed it. The Bramble turned and moved through the cloud. The council strike found only scrap and emptiness. The humans slipped away. It was not a grand victory. It was a small, clean thing. It saved lives. But the strike proved one thing. The council could hurt them. The invoice could not stop bullets. It could not stop missiles. The humans had to use more than paper and tricks. They had to show the galaxy evidence. Jalen moved fast. He had a plan that used the one tool the council cared for, reputation. He and a small team leaked old files. They did not steal them. The files were in public record if no one looked. They were accounts of deals, letters, maps, and receipts. The papers showed where the council had taken ports, sold rights, and ignored calls for help. They showed names of ships and dates of transfers. The leak flew across the nets like a spark. Screens lit on 1,000 worlds. Traders stopped. People read. Anger moved slow and then fast. Systems that had once cheered the council found new words. We were paid too little, one merchant said. We did not know, said another. People pressed their hands to their faces. A small faction in the council called for an open hearing. They could not stop the tide of proof. The world saw that the invoice was not a bluff. It was built on truth. In a chamber made of glass, a council judge asked Jalen how humans could force council hands. Jalen answered simply. We used the law you wrote, he said. We held your words up to the light. The judge fumbled. Some laughed at the boldness. Some feared the loss. The debate deepened. The delegates could choose to ignore Terra, or they could come and see. The human invoice asked them to come. As the delegates argued, old friends of the council grew uneasy. A few merchants quietly moved funds away from council banks. A few systems declared neutrality. The galaxy, which had been used as simple flows of credits and goods, felt a small, sharp tug. Admiral Heck watched the ships with a hard jaw. He ordered a quiet mission, not a mass strike, not a war. A single ship, a device. It would make the point. It would show that the council held the power to end the city. They sent the device in secret. It arrived over Terra at night. It was small and cold. It hung above a sleeping town and glowed like a pale star. It was not a bomb in the loud way bombs are loud. It was a machine that erased things cleanly. One press, one wave, no screams, only absence. When the human scanners first caught it, the report read like a bad rumor. Mira took the scanner in her hands and looked at the feed. She felt the blood leave her face. The device had a name carved into its frame in a language of machines. Reclamation Array. The delegates in the hearing did not know the array yet. They argued law in witness and clause. Jalen spoke of the need to see Terra. He did not tell them the full danger. He hoped the legal net would hold long enough. On the Bramble, Captain Rose set the presentation binder on a table and thumbed its worn edge. He tightened the bolt on an old rail launcher. Men moved quietly. They had to be ready for all sorts of answers. Across the systems, a faint counter began to show on public boards. It ticked down slowly. The human invoice had a due date. The council's response had a limit. The counter moved like a hand on a clock. Mira walked the ruined road again and thought of the child's picture. She thought of the names on the invoice. She thought of the array glowing far above. She pressed her palm to the paper in her pocket. It warmed under her hand like something alive. In the high chamber, a young delegate rose and said, "We must visit. We must see for ourselves." The room held its breath. Below, the night hummed. The array over Terra pulsed once. The public counter lost a minute. Some choices had to be made quickly. Some choices would not wait. The convoy steeled itself. The council readied its pride. The galaxy leaned forward, and the device above the sleeping town shifted its angle as if testing a path. The price of respect hung in the air like a blade. Night came with a thin wind. Lamps on the street made small islands of light. A shuttle lowered from a bright ship. Its steps unfolded like a hand. Men and women in fine robes walked down. They carried small cases and smiles that did not reach their eyes. They had come to see Terra. Children held signs in the square. One small sign read, "We are not disposable." The sign bent in the wind. The delegates walked past and looked at the crowd. They expected pity. They expected shame. They expected a show. Mira stood at the edge of the crowd. She had worked through the day. Her hands smelled of oil and cold metal. She held a paper in one pocket and a bolt in the other. She watched the delegates with a steady face. She thought of the reclamation array high above. She thought of the child with the picture. She thought of the names on the invoice. The council arranged a visit like a parade. They brought soft carpets and polite phrases. A glass hall was made for them where the floors gleamed and the ceilings showed stars. They expected the human show to be small. They expected to sign one paper and leave with their pride. Jalen met them at the hall. He wore a plain suit and had a small badge that read, "Envoy." He did not bow. He did not smile. He walked straight into the center and set a single binder on the table. The binder was heavy. It had a seal that matched the invoice. The delegate sat. Lisa sat near the center. Her face showed old fights. She had once argued for small worlds. She had lost more than she could say. She watched Jalen with a strange look. She had seen law do terrible things. Jalen opened the binder. He did not raise his voice. He read the first pages slowly. They were simple. They were names. They were facts. The hall listened. The children in the square watched on screens. The world watched. A council delegate tried to make a joke. The room laughed at first. Then someone in the crowd shouted a name. The laughter stopped. The room did not fill with sound again. The human team showed more than papers. They showed witnesses. Old miners came and told how their ports were sold. A teacher spoke of a school sold for feed. A mother showed a map of homes that vanished. The witnesses did not beg. They told what had been taken. Some delegates shifted in their seats. Some fingers dropped to hidden pens. A fierce silence grew. The council had always thought law could hide consequences. The human binder placed truth under the light. Not all the council felt shame. Admiral Heck sat with a face like stone. He had brought ships. He had the quiet of a man who trusted steel more than words. He watched Jalen and felt the old map of leads he could use. That night, while the hearings went on, a small ship came down on a hill outside the city. It was not part of the parade. It moved like a shadow. Men climbed out with soft boots. They set a small device in a field and turned it on. The device sent a silent wave toward the city. It was meant to test fear. In the hall, Jalen read a page that made Lisa's hand go cold. He read a legal clause that bound council delegates to safety. It stated in old law that if envoys were harmed while on foreign soil, their home systems would be held liable and certain assets could be seized to pay for the damage. The clause was long forgotten. The human legal team had found it and used it. Admiral Heck learned the clause through a fast message. He decided to act. He wanted a small strike, a warning, not war. He told his captains to aim at the field where the device sat and send a clear message. The strike came at dawn. Missiles cut the gray sky. The field where the device rested became light and heat. The device burned and bent. It did not explode the way the Admiral meant. It sent a pulse out in a thin wave. It hit a relay node. The relay node was part of the legal net the humans had set up at once across distant systems. Accounts went dark. Council-owned credits froze. Trade permits stopped. Banks on allied worlds showed locked notices. A merchant who woke to sell grain found his account held. A port commander trying to fill a freighter watched a hold notification blink red. The legal net had a clause the humans had set in many places. It tied council property to a chain of claims. The strike had triggered one claim. The claim spread in ways the council had not seen since their own laws had been modern. Admiral Heck cursed. He had meant to frighten. He had not wanted a lock on his funds or a stoppage of supply lines. He had not wanted merchants to shout in public squares that their goods could not reach their buyers. On the city walls, people cheered when the first council-owned freighter was stopped in orbit. On a trading hub far away, a man learned his invoice and the council would not be paid because a bank had frozen the council's assets. Word spread. People began to count how many ways law could be used as a tool. But the council struck again. They sent a squad of stealth craft to take one of the human ships. The squad thought they had surprise. They expected little. The human convoy had no heavy guns. The Bramble became a trap. Captain Rowe had prepared. He had taken an old cargo frame and filled it with metal plates and slow-burning charges. He had turned the freighter into a moving jigsaw. When the stealth craft came close, the Bramble opened its plates. It unfolded like a beast. It released scrap and rails and a net that could catch ships and snag their sensors. The craft found itself in a web. It could not fire cleanly. It could not leave without damage. The fight was quick and messy. The stealth craft withdrew and left a trail of smoke. The convoy limped but survived. Men cheered at the ports when the news came. Captain Rowe laughed a low laugh. He had turned death into a lesson. The council lost more than ships. Banks and trade lines broke. Systems that had once supported the council found their markets choked. Some governors whispered of change. Some merchants began to sign new papers with human banks. The council's allies looked at their ledgers and worried. In a high room, Jalen stood and read the final page of the human invoice. His voice was cold and clear. He read the last demand. The words carried like a bell. "Balance," he said. "Terra demands restitution or else repossession." The phrase landed on the hull like a weight. Engines over the harbor spun up. People ran to watch the sky. Somewhere far above, a council fleet answered the call. The fleet's lights burned blue and hard. The human convoy's engines glowed red and steady. Both sides prepared. Jalen closed the binder slowly. Mira tightened a bolt on a rail launcher. Captain Rowe stood at the Bramble's bridge and watched the stars. Admiral Heck stared at the open channels and pressed his fingers to his jaw. The ledger had changed the war. It had moved from words to wires to weapons. Now the balance had to be settled in another way, and the engines began to roar. The room was quiet. A thick book sat on a table like a promise. Light fell across its cover. The cover was plain. A small stamp read, "Invoice, receipt pending." People waited. The city held its breath. The council fleet hung like a ring above the harbor. Below, the convoy rested with burned paint and tired faces. Somewhere far away, banks still blinked with locked notices. The world kept a clock. Jalen walked into the room. He carried the heavy binder from the first hearing. He set it beside the thick book. He wore no shine. He wore the plain badge of an envoy. His hands did not shake. Mira stood near the door. Her palms smelled of oil. She had a small scar on one finger from the night the Bramble vanished. She kept the paper that started all this in her pocket. It felt small and very heavy. She had seen the array glow. She had seen a field burn. She had seen the net close. She had seen faces change. Captain Rowe came last. He walked with the slow step of a man who has lost things and found courage. The Bramble had scars like a good ship. The crew stood behind him, quiet, proud, ready to speak if needed. The delegates filled the other side of the hall. Lisa sat near the front. Her eyes were dry and direct. Admiral Heck stood apart, his stance tight like a man who kept a line. He had lost ships. He had lost some trust. He was not smiling. Jalen opened the binder and read the final list. He spoke each name like a coin. Each clause had been tested. Each demand had teeth. The last demand was not about revenge. It was about work and honor. We asked for repair, Jalen said. We asked for land returned where we can. We asked for trade to be fair. We asked for a seat that is not a show. We asked that Terra be counted as a world, not a ledger entry. The hall was still. Some delegates shuffled. Some mouths tightened. For a long while no one spoke. Then Lisa rose. She walked to the table and placed a small silver pen beside the thick book. Her hand did not tremble. She looked at Jalen, at Mira, at Captain Rowe. She looked at the seal on the binder. She put her finger on one page of the book where a line said, "Restitution and recognition may replace force." She closed her eyes for a second. Then she signed. A murmur moved through the hall, like wind through leaves. The pen moved again and again. Other delegates rose. Some signed quickly, some hesitated. Admiral Heck did not stand first. He waited and watched how the world would shift. Finally he walked, slow and steady, to the table. He pressed the pen down and left his mark. The metal scraped softly. The sound was small, but it fell across the room like a bell. Outside, the council fleet blinked. The sailors on the ships watched screens and read the same simple line. Delegate sign. A ripple of talk ran to the command nets. Systems that had frozen accounts found the locks lifting. A port far away saw a ship's permits clear. Money began to move in cautious lines again. The legal net the humans had set was not merely a trap. It was a path. But the work was not done. The human team had asked for two things beyond papers. They had asked for truth and for repair. They had asked that the council help rebuild what had been taken. The delegates had signed to start that work. They had also agreed to a public apology read in all major systems. The apology was not long. It said the council had been wrong. It said the council would help fix damage and would set new rules so no world could be counted as disposable again. Not all cheers were loud. Not all wounds healed. A mother still held a map with empty spaces where farms had been. A child still set a small flag on a hill that once had a house. But the ledger had turned. The balance would be kept in law and in work, not in hidden stamps. Then a message came from deep command. The reclamation array above, Terra bowed its head. It was a slow thing. Imagined as a machine could imagine bowing. The array powered down. It sent a final pulse as it died. The pulse carried information. The pulse carried a list of devices the council had used for reclamation. It named ships and machines and the officers who had signed orders. The nets carried the data like a clean wind. People saw the names. Admiral Heck sat back and tasted loss. He had wanted a lesson sent. He had not wanted his own tools named and shown. He had not wanted the people who sold ports and fields to have their names read in public. The sound of truth made a small, ugly crack in his pride. Mira stepped forward when the public apology was read. She did not speak of revenge. She did not ask to tear buildings down. She spoke of work. "You saw our names," she said to the hall. "Now repair what you can. Teach us fair trade. Pay back what you owe in tools and in work. Help our children have a school instead of a certificate of debt." Her voice carried. It was not loud. It did not need to be. The crowd in the square and the crews on the Bramble heard it. A merchant on a far world heard it. A judge in the council hall heard it. The path from paper to work had a new map. Days turned into months. The first repairs were small. Ports reopened. A field got new water lines. A mine returned to a village. People who had lost their homes were given land to farm again. Trade rules were rewritten. A council seat was not given with showy chair, but with binding votes on small trade matters. The thread of law that had once smothered Terra was rewoven. 10 years later, a small book was placed on a shelf in a quiet room. The thick book of receipt had a new stamp across its cover. The stamp read, "Paid in full, receipt number 001. Mira walked by and touched the spine. She felt the rough cover and the years it held. She thought of the child with the picture, and of the bramble's nets, and of Jalen's calm voice. The galaxy did not become kind overnight. There were new fights and new debts. Some systems grumbled. Some old men refused to change. But a seed had been planted. People learned a different count. They counted lives, not lines on a page. On a hill outside the city, a child planted another flag. This one was small and bright. The child opened a thin book and read aloud, slowly, the first words of the new law that kept Terra safe. Never disposable. Mira smiled. Jalen sat on a stone and watched the stars. Captain Rowe polished a plate on the bramble. In a drawer under Jalen's desk, the original invoice sat folded. It had one new line written on it in a small, neat hand. Invoice number 1, paid. Invoice number 2, for the cost of remembering. The stars looked different now. Not kinder, not softer, but they were a place counted by many hands. And Terra had sent a bill that asked for what mattered. The galaxy had learned, at last, to read it.